initiative, but of course, we have multiple smaller meetings, and we've got our work cut out for us in the future, building up our food infrastructure. So just a bit about the backstory here. First of all, what do we mean even when we say food infrastructure? The word infrastructure can mean lots of things, but we're talking about all the ways that we can get the food together, aggregate food, store food, process food, and then distribute it. Basically, all the systems and facilities that are needed to sort of get the food from the farm to the table, right? So in 2016 and to 2018, Montgomery County Food Council conducted a food hub feasibility study. The feasibility study talked about basically looking at the need and assets in place to put in place a food hub. It was sort of found at that time that what we really should focus on was building production capacity. Then in 2019 to 2022, we're there. We had a programming response. We've been building production capacity. At this time, we need to, for a lot of other reasons, the pandemic, the supply chain shortages have really intensified our focus on increasing food resilience and just straight up emergency preparedness, building our local food systems to have the most resilient food system possible in the DC area. So to that end, we started to say, we want to talk and learn about food infrastructure in this county and sort of pull together a lot of our resources and assets in the DC area and really get together, get together an inventory of what we have already for food systems infrastructure and see where the gaps are, see where we need to fill them. And we wanted it to be a collaborative process. So we wanted to invite as many stakeholders as possible to learn along with us and be part of the planning process. To that end, one of the first places we toured and learned about was 4P Foods, which is a food hub in Warrenton, Virginia. They deliver to the DC area. They work a lot with the DC area. They have CSA boxes. They deliver to institutions, plus retail wholesale, donate surplus to charities, and they source from a lot of different farms, over 1,000 farms of all sizes. They work with other food hubs within the Eastern Food Hub Collaborative, which is an organization we're very lucky to have in the Eastern region, Mid-Atlantic region. Because the Food Hub Collaborative actually, it's transactional, it's learning together, but more than just learning together, it's buying and selling from each other. So the food hubs can work together there. We're lucky to have the Eastern Food Hub Collaborative. And of course, the 4P Food services from traditional sources as well to fill the entire grocery bag, so to speak. Tom was very insightful talking about, and he'll always talk about patient cash capital. So the idea that we need to remember that when we're funding a institution like this, facility like this, it could take up to 20 years to see returns. So we need to have that kind of mindset as we fund these kind of facilities at the outset. 4P Food started with an Eagle Bank loan with his condo as collateral. And he said it took a year and a half to figure out how to get funded through a charity, but they get funded through two foundation sources at this time also. So we also toured, that was an example of a large food hub in the area. We also toured an example of a small food hub in the area because one size doesn't necessarily fit all here. So Frederick Fresh Online is an online platform. They aggregate and store with the small cold storage that you can see here in this picture, products from a number of farmers. Folks go online, they order what they want, and a volunteer picks it up from the farms. The farms also can drop off in coolers. It's operated out of a historic barn at a youth camp. The youth camp maintains the physical space and a number of the other health and safety sort of certification that they need. And it's a farmer volunteer coordinates and packs the CSA boxes. So that's an example of a small food hub or food infrastructure facility. So we toured a number of the community kitchen spaces with the idea that does the food infrastructure need to be built up in terms of commercial kitchen space? We toured Crossroads Community Kitchen, which is a nonprofit. It's a shared kitchen space. Folks can pay by the hour. They do offer a lot of good business assistances for food startups. So this is something where the entire structure has been geared towards small startups for food businesses, paying by the hour being essential because they can, it's sort of the a low bar to start getting involved. And Ivy Baker, who's the gentleman in the Hawaiian shirt here, down here in the picture, he offers this business assistance and really gets folks through all of the processes and how you start a business, from legal compliance to marketing to working out efficiency measures. So they offer some very valuable services to small food businesses. I forgot to mention they're in Tacoma Park, Maryland. So they are in Montgomery County. And they really are interested in streamlining their sources from of local raw ingredients. So there's a lot of potential there to work with the community kitchens for any food infrastructure or food hub to work with commercial kitchens and really reach out to all these small food businesses. We also toured La Cocina, Virginia, which is in Arlington, Virginia. It was started in 2014. It is operated as a 501c3 nonprofit. They have need-based pricing structures, which means you pay by the hour. A small food business can pay by the hour to use the kitchen, or they can get a membership type to use the kitchen. They have one of the ways in which it's actually a funding source for them, as well as a way that they create social impact in their community, is they have a culinary training program. It's an 8-week job training program in English and Spanish. They said that 85% of their clients are Spanish speaking, so they're really filling a need there. And they have a cafe retail space, a storefront in which they can sell products, and their cafe is operated sort of as a training cafe. It's about 5,600 square feet. So let's see. Why is my computer locking up all of a sudden? Just one moment. So we also toured Farmland Commercial Kitchen, which is a shared kitchen space in Rockville. But the interesting thing about Farmland Commercial Kitchen was it's a private business. It's been operating for about a year and already has 35 businesses using the kitchen, from private chefs, food trucks, caterers, farmers market vendors, and all sorts of other sort of different types. You can see one of the food trucks in the picture here below, even just pulling right up, loading up the food truck with the food it needs. They have 6 different kitchen stalls for businesses, and you can rent hourly or you have a membership. So looking at these commercial kitchen spaces, what's interesting to me is there's a lot of potential for the interaction with the commercial kitchen spaces and any food infrastructure. But there is quite a lot of commercial kitchen space already available, and the Montgomery County Economic Development Commission has done an inventory of the commercial kitchen space in Montgomery County, and they, according to their inventory, there is a certain level of underutilized commercial kitchen space. So that's to me an interesting element of building up food infrastructure. We also just finally toured Sandy Springs Farm. And Sandy Springs Farm is just one of our great farm partners. Tom Farquhar is a great thought partner in a lot of this programming because he has been selling to Montgomery County Public Schools. He's one of the very few farmers who's managed to get over the administrative hurdles to sell to Montgomery County Public Schools. And one of the biggest hurdles, he will tell you, is GAP certification. In order to sell any quantity to the schools, you have to be GAP certified. And you have to sell to in Jessup, there's a facility, Lancaster Foods, that all the sales, or most of the sales, must go through in order to wind up in the food nutrition services in the school cafeterias. And unfortunately, we have 0 farmers are GAP certified in Montgomery County. And so we're working on getting through that certification process and just overcoming those hurdles. There are a number of hurdles related to that. GAP certification is no easy thing. It's a bunch of food safety measures, and it involves putting in place a lot of different infrastructure on the farm, as well as getting audits on the farm, and as well as pulling a bunch of paperwork on the farm and following protocols every day on the farm. So there are a lot of hurdles there. So we're working on that, and that's something that I think any food infrastructure initiative needs to take into account. The other thing that we learned that Tom was very astute in pointing out, that we have to think carefully about if we install any kind of processing equipment or packing equipment at an aggregation site, the scale of the equipment needed at the aggregation facility is important. For example, just keeping it down, keeping the scale of the equipment down. We can't handle, it can't be a huge potato washer that takes up, a giant warehouse. It has to be a smaller one, that kind of thing. So we just finally wanted to point out that through this entire process, we've learned that there's a lot of collaboration potential. We're very lucky to be Eastern Food Hub Collaborative, as I mentioned. We also have the Washington Metropolitan Council of Governments, the Maryland Food Resilience Council, and the newly started Montgomery County Office of Food System Resilience as potential coordination efforts. And even though we said that this was the conclusion of the food infrastructure series, we do have one more event, which is on Monday, just a little plug, on Monday, we will be hearing from Dreaming Out Loud for a lunch and learn about how they operate. So I'll drop the link in the chat on how to sign up. It's on Monday, 3 o'clock. And one of the things we've learned is to ensure food institutionals are engaged from the start from Dreaming Out Loud so far. And we'll learn more on Monday. All right, so thank you so much. And we'll have a time for Q&A at the end. But for now, let's go back to Esther.
Thank you, Lorianne. Next up, we have Heather Buskin. She is the Executive Director of the Montgomery County Food Council, and she's going to share an overview of what's happening in Montgomery County.
Esther, actually, I don't think that Heather was able to join us today, so I think we can go on to the next agenda item.
Okay, perfect. So next up, we have our first speaker for today, and it's Tariq Sheriff. He is a food policy analyst at the DC Office of Planning. So take it away.
Great, thank you so much. Let me just pull up my slides here. All right. All right, great. Well, thank you all for having me. Really appreciate it. So like Esther said, my name is Tariq Sharif. I'm the food policy analyst at the DC Office of Planning, and my entire job is to support food policy in the district and support the DC Food Policy Council, which is great. So this presentation is on our central food processing facility assessment we completed back in 2021. And I'll talk a little bit about what happened in that study, and then go on to discuss what we're doing with that information for our next study, which we're hoping to release an RFP for in the next month or so. All right, so I won't go into too much detail on processing facilities, since Lauren did a great job on food hubs and what that means for infrastructure. But in our definition, we made a central food processing facility, which is a facility that conducts food production and processing for meal preparation, provides aggregation, cold and dry storage, and co-manufacturing space. So it's really almost this magic bullet that solves a lot of problems within our food system, developing infrastructures needed by not only agencies in the district that are trying to do their own food procurement and food production, like DCPS, for shelter meals, for correctional facilities, so we can do our own self-operated and switch away from vendors and food service management companies. So we can bring in those values-based procurement opportunities that we really want to focus on. But it also means for us really using as a food hub for local businesses and regional farms that we can kind of allow them to get the access they need and make it a part of our critical infrastructure for food system resilience, which is really important, which we found out in the COVID pandemic. So that's where we kind of started with this, and this study was done in the middle of the pandemic, so some added insights there as well. So how it started. So we started with the Healthy Students Amendment Act of 2018, which really was the legislation that forced this study to be done. And that was the premise behind that was we want to find how a facility could prepare, process, grow, and store healthy, nutritious foods, support nutrition education, provide job training programs. So again, that magic bullet of all these pieces coming together in the food system that we can kind of work on. So the contract was awarded on March 20th, 2020 to the Curate and FoodWorks Group, so 2 local businesses that were consultants that managed the study for us. And it really goes through management, operations, physical facility, and partnership opportunities within the district and the region. And this is really being treated as kind of a regional food hub. And a big shout out to our consultant team, which is Kim Bryden and Dana Rocks from Curate, and Wendy Stewart and Emily Paul from FoodWorks Group. They were amazing and did a great job on this. So I want to recognize them for that work. So our methodology behind this was really working with local leaders. So we had an advisory board of 13 local and national food systems leaders, some of whom are on this call, I believe. Chris Bradshaw from Dreaming Out Loud was one of those folks as well. So lots of food system expertise. We did kind of a lit review of existing systems, did some case studies on 4 different other districts that use central facilities for their school food production. We did tons of interviews with 62 different individuals within the district and national food systems, coding analysis, and then the final report. And we also had this consultant team meet with our Sustainable Supply Chain Working Group of our DC Food Policy Council to really help direct some of that study and understand the supply chain issues that we were facing in the district. So some limitations, we couldn't do any facility visits, unlike some of the great facilities that Lori mentioned, because of COVID. Some of the interviewees weren't able to discuss with us because of emergency operations and pandemic response. We had a very tight timeline, so everything was done within that fiscal year. So starting in March and ending in September 30th. So that was a bit tough. The other assumptions here that we made was that DC public schools would be an anchor institution for this facility. So they're going to be the main operator in using this production facility and get it started up. So that's going to help fill out some of that expense as to why we're building this and the case for it to DC Council, because DCPS is going towards self-operations. And that these recommendations in this report would take 5 to 10 years to fully achieve and be a phased approach to operating. So we started with kind of a review of strengths and weaknesses in the district. I won't read through all of these, but you guys can take a look in our report, which I'll send a link to at the very end. But really, our weaknesses are, I think, like any other county and regional space we have here, is land access, infrastructure, and systemic inequities across the food system. It's a really big problem we face, and that causes issues with lack of food system resilience, difficulty in emergency response, and we have a high cost of contract food operations, at least in the district, because we use food service management vendors for all of our food service programs that the district operates and runs. And so we need this space for cold storage aggregation, bringing more regional producers and building that local economy out, and bringing those producers in so we can focus on those local purchasing goals. So why this facility? I'll let you read kind of these things on the slide here, but there's a couple of things I want to point out that really the focus of this work is that a facility can reduce reliance on major food contracts. And that helps us create a large facility for self-operations, mostly DCPS, so public school systems, correctional facilities, shelters, rec centers. We can do our own food production, and then we can build in our values-based procurement options here. So local food, following the Good Food Purchasing Program guidelines, and we can really strengthen our local supply chain by following those pieces and purchasing from local producers. Create this food hub location where we're storing, aggregating food products and bring that node of supply close to the node of demand. So we're shortening that supply chain, creating more resilience and redundancy within our systems. And that, again, helps support emergency response by having a facility that can process, prepare, and distribute food for residents, community-based organizations. And again, we're purchasing from local food businesses and allowing this commercial kitchen space and off hours to be used for entrepreneurs, for food incubation, cold and dry storage, aggregation, and distribution for businesses, right? So there's all these different value-added pieces we can get in here from this one facility without having to build extra pieces in capacity. We just build the capacity automatically. And then long-term, of course, we hope it can help reduce the district's carbon footprint, which is really important to us. And we have a couple of these legislation that are aimed at making those challenges solvable. So our report is organized into 3 distinct areas. So impact, operations, and physical facility. It comes with 45 best practices that we've gleaned from across the country and 57 recommendations. It's a lot. I won't go into all of them, but please read our executive summary for some light reading and our full report for some heavy reading. So impact really focuses on equity, revenue, economic development, and workforce development. So these are kind of the way that we get our value add and really address those equity issues and the needs of the community, which is really important to us. So this has 8 best practices and 14 recommendations, but really it's focused on creating a more sustainable and equitable food system. And we're really focused again on the revenue and economic development portion here to make that case of why we need this facility. Operations, again, lots of different categories here, but this is actually how the facility would operate, what is needed as far as equipment, management structure, processing equipment, workforce strategies, everything all the way down the line. And this has been really helpful in illustrating and drawing a picture of what that facility looks like based on what's needed in the area. And then, of course, the physical facility itself. What needs to be located to for, again, the equity sense, we want to make sure that we're located in the area close to highways, what the process and workflow looks like, cold and dry storage, how we incorporate water reuse and recovery, if we need to have some co-location of composting sites, having the LEED certified facility, and then making sure, of course, we're thinking about a strategically planned space that can grow with the needs of the district as well. So that's kind of the review of what we've done so far on that research study. Since then, we actually have a virtual launch. You can watch the video on our website, which is great. And that was with Office of Planning, our consultant team, and then district food system leaders that were on the advisory board. We also published a fact sheet about a central food processing facility and its strengths and what it can bring to the district and other areas with GW's Redstone Center. We've been working very closely with HSEMA, so Homeland Security Emergency Management Agency for District of Columbia, on their food and water resiliency study, and looking at how this facility can support that work to create more food system resilience and redundancy, not just in the district, but across the region, which is really important. That's a very important angle we're trying to focus on to find some capital funding that can help build this facility. And so that's something we're looking at in the future, mostly because I think FEMA has money they want to put towards building infrastructure, but because they are an emergency management agency, they have to figure out how to utilize facilities like infrastructure like this during blue sky days, and then convert that facility into emergency management needs for crisis. So we're trying to figure out if this is a good fit for that and find some capital funding from the federal government. We've been focusing our efforts internally in DC to focus on values-based procurement across the government, working with the GFPP coalition on that and doing some internal work to increase those standards. And most importantly, we got a fiscal year 23 budget allocation, which just hit our bank account, so to speak, on October 1st, to conduct the next part of the study, which is a siting and feasibility study. So let's dive into that a little bit more. So this next part of the study is really focused on what this facility can do and understand the business case for it. So we're really focused on being collaborative with other partner agencies, mostly DC Public Schools, since they would be that anchor institution, working with Department of General Services for identifying existing facilities and sites, and of course, working with HSEMA on emergency management uses. And so what we're looking at here in these market analysis, technical analysis, financial analysis, the type of site, again, more detail about what that site looks like, where it could be, and then whatever other studies need to be included in this. The market analysis, again, is looking at that demand and what the addressable market is for cold and dry storage and commercial kitchen space, and understanding the need of farmers and other producers in the area for the need for that value-added cold and dry storage space, and workforce development within the district. Having an advisory board that's going to help direct the study in the right direction for us to understand all the necessary pieces and components that go with that. The technical analysis, again, what do we need to build and what inputs do we need to fit that addressable market we've identified? So facilities, equipment, materials, management, that kind of stuff. And then of course the financial analysis. So what's our break even? What does the cost look like? Do we need to have matching funds if we like to seek out some grant funding? What's the ROI? When does that term hit? And what's the phase schedule for approaching? And then, of course, type of site, again, thinking about things like equity. Is it close to public transportation? Is it close to highways? Do we have loading docks? What's the cost for folks that want to access it? Where are the staff that are going to staff the facility come from? Where do they live? How do they get there? So taking all those things into account and making sure we're focusing on equity first. And of course, if there's any zoning restrictions, how do we fix that if we need to? And then, of course, lastly, what are the next steps we need to pursue after this? So that's kind of where we're at now. That's our goal for this facility long-term, is to be that, maybe not magic bullet, but really support the overall work of the district in achieving food system resilience, and how a district facility can then support the whole region in general. And that's kind of our goal. So regional approach with collaboration to really achieve some of these food system problems, or solve food system problems that we have across the area. So happy to take some questions on that. That was a lot of information. Yeah, please.
Yeah, and Tariq, I think we're going to go ahead and have a Q&A at the end.
Sure.
Also, just, you know, since we have such a tight agenda, perhaps we can go ahead and move along to the next speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Next up, we have Brittany Cook.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Hold on a second. Oh no, sorry. All right. Thank you. I am Brittany Cook. I am the Food Resiliency Specialist for the Maryland Food System Resiliency Council, and I'm staffed through the Department of Emergency Management as support staff. So the information, just as a FYI, that I'm going to present today is strictly from the council and not from the Department of Emergency Management. We are, as support staff, we are just here as a guidance and to help the Food Council in their charge. So just as a little bit of background, the Food Council was established by June 2021. And so we are now moving into our second year of being established as a council. The bill, as presented here in my presentation, was sponsored by Senator Hester and Delegate Charkoudian. And it was the council was established to be a multi-agency collaborative effort of experts in the food system in Maryland to establish a more resilient food system within Maryland as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so the council is really driven by 4 main goals. And one is to first look at the issue of food insecurity in the state as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the economic crisis as resulting from that. In addition to making recommendations, which is really the meat and potatoes of what we do at the council and the work that we do through our working groups, to develop a equitable and sustainable policy recommendations and to increase long-term resiliency in the food system for Maryland. And then we also work to help expand Food Council organizations, as well as we are charged with developing a strategic plan to increase productivity and procurement of Maryland certified foods. The council is structured in such a way that we have at least 2 co-chairs. So one is the secretary of the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. And then by statute, it's also as a co-chair as well, we have a member from a food council in Maryland. There are also 3 other co-vice chairs that are from different agencies as indicated on the slide right there. Membership is always pretty broad, of course, because this is a collaborative effort. So by statute, we have farmers, we have food council members. There's also multiple agencies like the Department of Ag, food banks, all different sectors and stakeholders within the system, Maryland food system, that come together in order to meet the charge of the goals indicated before. The council is mandated by statute to meet a couple of deliverables. And so the first deliverable was in 2021, and that was our initial interim report, which was a huge success and was a huge effort for the council to turn over. There were 16 recommendations that were developed that hit all 4 of the goals initially in the first interim report. And so that leads us to 2022, which is right now. Mandated by statute, the council would then have to do another report that's due to Maryland General Assembly as well. In that report, we discuss long-term strategies in terms of a statewide food policy council. And so that report has been posted on our website, which is listed here, with all 11 of our new updated recommendations as well. In terms of the discussion that we're having today related to infrastructure, there are at least 3 recommendations that are now included on our report that I think kind of fit within the purview of this discussion. And one is recommendation 2.3, which is to establish and sustain regional agriculture centers in 4 regions of Maryland. So what that recommendation basically hatches out is that first we do an assessment for each one of the existing areas to see what the needs and efforts are for each one of those regions. The recommendation hatches out that we should develop, at least after that additional assessment, that 3 new centers would be built. And then the 4th one is actually would be like an update to an existing center, which is the Southern Maryland Agriculture Development Commission. And then each one of the facilities and services, programs, and any kind of products or marketing that's associated with that particular center would be based off of the need of that particular area, based off of the assessment that was initially performed, and stakeholder input, of course. Another recommendation that probably fits within the purview of this discussion is recommendation 2.4, which goes into cold storage. This is actually a follow-up from our first initial report, in which we recommended, or the council recommended, allocating funding to increase the cold storage capacity across the state to meet needs. It's a funding request for at least 1 large walk-in unit and 2 small walk-in units for each one of the 23 counties and Baltimore City, and also to administer and manage the process. So that's another recommendation that kind of builds off of our first report. And then finally, we have the grant, the fund a grant program, to reduce and compost school waste. So that is another build off of prior years from 2021. This grant program is designed to implement critical climate protective efforts through schools who wish to have like a zero waste goal, and to compost organic materials, and then to also place a greater attention on fighting hunger and recovery and food recovery through diverting food from landfills and incinerators and the like. So again, on our website, we actually do now currently have the 2022 report posted, and 2021 report is posted as well, if anyone was interested in looking at that. And so finally, the council has and will continue to further examine the food system. We do have a 2023 report, which our working groups that we have, our subcommittees, are now trying to determine which charge they want to take up for the next round. We do have quite a bit of gearing up for the legislative session so that we could support some bills and possibly provide testimony if needed. The council still will meet once a month on the first Thursday, and then we have subcommittee meetings either bi-weekly or monthly, depending on which one you want to go to. And I can also put the website in the chat if anyone is interested in attending a meeting or looking at any of our past records. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Brittany, for that. And then next up we have Noel. So you can take it away.
All right. Let me pull up my slides here. Okay. Can folks see that all right?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for having me today. Again, my name is Noel Bielaczyc. I'm a value chain specialist at the Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems. And I'm joining today just to share sort of some more general information from our National Food Hub Survey, which is a project that the Center for Regional Food Systems has conducted with partners at the Wallace Center since about 2012. So this information will be less specific to the Mid-Atlantic region and more about national trends and some of the things we're seeing nationally. And I think the 2021 National Food Hub Survey may be of particular interest to folks because it looks specifically at food hub operations and finances in the calendar year 2020, which was a very rocky year for food hubs in general. And the food hub survey also looks at things like food hub activities, business growth and viability, social mission, market outlook. It's actually quite a long survey. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail. I'm just going to kind of touch on a few key findings that I think might be of interest and can certainly explore more of the survey if folks are interested. So just some quick background on the National Food Hub Survey project. National Food Hub Survey, as I said, it's a longitudinal research project conducted every other year biennially in collaboration between the Center for Regional Food Systems and Wallace Center. So we have surveys going back to 2013, and we then compare data across all those years to look at trends, and particularly interested in things like business and financial viability. And the surveys have changed over the years. We adjust the survey each time we are sending it out in order to kind of adjust for current trends and topics of interest. So the 2021 survey, as you'd expect, had a whole section on impacts of COVID-19. And so we've modified the survey each year. We get about a 33% response rate from the approximately 400 food hubs nationally. So we get around 100, 120 responses every time we send out the survey. And you can certainly go on our website, and we have the previous surveys all there. And the 2021 survey has not been released yet, but we're getting ready to publish it anytime now. So, and excuse my dog, she's talking to me in the background. So just a few key takeaways from the 2021 National Food Hub Survey. As you'd all expect, the COVID-19 pandemic had a really significant impact on many aspects of food hub operations, including sales activities, employment, mission and funding, all pretty much across the board. Some of the most significant impacts we see are just on the sort of market and sales strategy that food hubs have employed. So many food hubs really expanded into the direct-to-consumer sales space in 2020. Something probably makes sense to most folks, given the sort of programs that were emerging, the needs within communities for food either delivered to homes or businesses or those sort of things. So the expansion of Food box programs, for example, is a good example of that. We also saw the dependence on non-sales revenue, like grants or federal funding, grew significantly in 2020. And the last thing thought was interesting is just the importance that food hub networks play in supporting individual food hubs. I'm somewhat biased from my perspective. I coordinate our Michigan Food Hub Network and have done so since 2012. So we have a very robust food hub network here in Michigan, somewhat similar to the Mid-Atlantic network that you all mentioned earlier. We've sort of started off in the learning space and have over the years built up enough trust that we can work on things like transactional and logistical collaborations. So again, I'm somewhat biased in my perspective, but the Food Hub Survey confirms that those sort of regional networks of food hubs are really important and to helping support individual organizations to be successful. So I'm just going to jump into a little bit more of the data, and then we can certainly circle back if there are any questions. But specifically, some of the impacts of COVID-19 on food hubs. Like I said, the proportion of organizations whose business model was primarily wholesale distribution, we saw a drop in that from respondents in 2021. So from 39% wholesale distribution down to 20% in 2021. The flip side of that is that organizations that were at least partially operating a direct consumer sales rose from 54% in 2019 to over 75% in 2021. And again, that's those food boxes and things like that. SNAP benefit redemption by food hubs also jumped really significantly from 2019 to 2021, from under 100,000 to almost 400,000 in 2021. So food hubs are, as they're moving into those direct consumer and retail sales channels, are becoming approved to be direct redeemers of SNAP benefits, which is a big change that we're seeing, and a really important way that food hubs can provide food access type services in their communities. And again, the dependence on non-sales revenue really increased somewhat in 2019, 2021 timeframe. And let's see, I have a figure here that shows some of the ways that non-sales revenue changed between 2019 and 2021. So we see actually quite a big jump in donations from individuals, but also, increases across the board in federal government funding, state government funding, local government funding. All those sort of funding streams really stepped in to play an important role in meeting the need in 2020. So just interesting to see how those things have changed over time. Just a couple of data points on food hub networks that might be of interest. A full 75% of respondents to the National Food Hub Survey in 2021 participate in some kind of food hub network, which is a really high number. The survey may have selected people who are involved in networks more than not, because we did promote the survey through some food hub networks. So that's kind of a possible reason why we see such a high involvement in food hub networks. But just some of the various ways that food hubs are engaging in food hub networks. Most are exchanging information and sort of the learning support space. But we do see quite a bit of collaboration around grant funding or raising capital. Half of folks are coordinating some kind of hub-to-hub transactions, and 50% are, collaborating on some kind of supply chain logistics, which is a pretty significant number of food hubs involved in that level of collaboration. And just some of the top challenges that we see in 2021, we ask this question each year. and consistently at the top of the list is managing growth. So we see a lot of food hubs starting, and the hardest part is getting bigger. And there's so much demand typically, and managing the growth of an organization, the capital needs, the labor needs, the infrastructure needs is always one of the biggest challenges. And we see trucking and logistics is always right up there near the top as well, and access to capital. Those tend to be kind of the top three across all survey years. And so it's interesting to see that even in a year when things were sort of upside down for a lot of reasons, in terms of markets and operations, those continue to be the top challenges for food hubs, and something that food hubs are experiencing across the board, no matter where they're located in the country. So again, happy to answer any questions when we get to the Q&A section. Likewise, feel free to reach out by email, call. Happy to have a conversation with any of y'all and talk a little bit more about Food Hub Survey. Happy to join you today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Noel. And if you want to put your contact information in the chat, that would be great as well.
Great, will do.
Thank you. And next up on the agenda, we have Katie Stevens, which I see that she jumped on the call, so I'm not sure.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, awesome.
All right.
Katie, I am going to give you screen sharing abilities right now.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for being with us.
All right. Can you see my slideshow? I'm going to try to. Okay. So thank you for giving me a few minutes to talk to you today about our value-added food processing facility that we are working on in Frederick County. So this is a feasibility study. So we have put together a great project team of vendors that are nationally recognized and working on food projects around the country. So the project is managed by HRNA, and then they have industry outreach with ACDS, who's also based here in Maryland and has worked on a lot of food projects here in our area, and then Epstein, who will work on the engineering and architectural side of the project. So the study is quite a long, year-long project. So we're currently in phase 1. That's a survey and outreach portion of the study. So we're doing stakeholder engagement sessions, individual one-on-one interviews, and looking at sector trends. So ACDS is managing this section. So this will kind of end of January or end of December, early January. So we are still looking for stakeholder interviews. So feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to share information on how you can be involved in that. Then we'll move into our second phase, which is about the feasibility analysis and business plan. This will also include looking at potential sites around the county. So that is obviously like the hot topic item. Everybody asked me, where is it going to be located? Well, I don't know. And that's part of the project. So looking at the top 3 potential sites for it, looking at the financial analysis and business plan. Should this be a publicly run facility, private, or a public-private partnership, and the business plan development for that, and then the economic impact of this. Obviously, that's one of the things we're very interested in as far as economic development, is what that impact will look like for the ag community and the greater community as a whole. And then the final piece, late in 2023, will be our final feasibility study. In the final report, which we will be sure to share with all of you. So kind of what we're looking at, our objectives are looking at innovation, job opportunities, access to local foods, and improve the overall health and wellness of our community. Some of the ways we can do that by supporting innovation, looking at the commercial kitchen incubator, business technical assistance, and processing and manufacturing. But really right now it's trying to figure out what does that processing and manufacturing look like, and what should be included in that. Obviously, workforce development is a huge issue. We've had a couple people who are concerned, well, we don't want you to take our workers, and we're definitely not trying to do that. We want to increase job opportunities in the food space. Access to local food is obviously a hot topic for all of us. So looking at a food hub, shared dry and cold storage, that's been one of the biggest things we've heard so far from our stakeholders, is the need for shared storage, especially cold storage, to meet some of the health department regulations, and potential for a farmer's market or kind of on facility store. And then also improving the health and wellness of our community through educational programming, food pantry, and maybe a food prescription program, or just some of the options. We're not saying that these are all definitely going to be included, but just trying to look at potential.
I think, Katie, before you move on, you were muted. You kind of froze for the last minute. So
Sorry, that it just told me my internet was unstable. Can you hear me now?
yes, you can hear
Okay.
you, but the last minute we did not hear.
Okay, I'll go back. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, so strengthening access to local food, we'll start back there. So obviously, one of the hot topics is access to local food. It's important to all of us, important to our local ag community. So looking at the options for a food hub, shared and dry and cold storage. This has actually been one of the biggest things we've heard from our stakeholder meetings, is the need for cold storage, especially to meet health department regulations. And then also looking at the option of a farmer's market or a store that's in conjunction with the facility. And then also important is improving the health and wellness of our community through educational programming, food pantry, and food prescription program. Not all these things will definitely be included, but they're things that we are looking at as a part of the facility. So the design process, this is a long process to get to the finish line and get a facility constructed. But we're working on really the first two blocks of this right now, looking at our mission, objectives, and goals. And then the design of it, the programming, the general use, what the facility really looks like. And then our goal is within the next year that we would move to design development and actually start getting some drawings of what a facility would look like. Obviously, the permitting process comes into play even now as we're looking at locations to ensure that wherever, is a top location would actually meet the requirements that the county or state may have. Things we're considering as we're designing this, the relationship between the users, the programs and services for users and the community. But to add is, we're looking at, depending on what types of items are being processed, is the, how those health departments or USDA regulations work together for the processing of those items. And so we're lucky to have a great team at ACDS that understands those regulations and how different food processing items can work together. Looking at the management structure, as I mentioned earlier, the budget and how this project could be funded. So we're looking at federal, state, and local funding for the continued planning. So design phase, and then build out and construction, and then operation. And how do we continue to fund a project like this? Staging and priorities and relevant trends in the food industry. I think COVID changed the food industry greatly, but we want to make sure that we're looking into the future and what's coming next as well. Looking at, it's also important that we're looking at trends, the importance of the value-added processing, modern and high density facilities. Robotics is obviously a big piece with the workforce challenges we're facing right now. Also looking at modular manufacturing that we've kind of seen now in the dairy industry, a lot of the kind of sea container processing facilities. So we're looking at that as an option for a facility. Food safety and traceability is obviously key. Looking at e-commerce and last mile delivery. And then workforce development is always key and something we want to keep in mind as we're building a project. It's not just about giving farmers an option to process it, it's but how do we create a greater food system in Frederick County and the surrounding community. So just quickly going through our functional areas. So looking at innovation with an incubator, commercial kitchen, food for health, thinking about allergy-free kitchens and how do we have different spaces that are good for different products. Food security with a food pantry, ag resources, so farmer resources for the greater community, and then processing and packaging resources, markets, community gardens, greenhouses, and then looking at external things, USDA livestock processing, while processing the animal itself has not been included. We have had a lot of interest in secondary meat processing, dairy processing, small scale, and then retail and restaurants. I think we really have to think a food hub and aggregation, storage and distribution with a facility like this. So we have a great range of stakeholders from residents, farmers, food and beverage manufacturing, schools and hospitals. And really we're looking at a broad range of uses from local fresh food, aggregation, storage and distribution, food security and access, processing, kitchen space, and then educational workforce program. Because this facility really won't be limited to farmers. It's really about the greater community. You know, a lot of the need right now in Frederick is certified commercial kitchen space for people that aren't on farm, but maybe using farm-based products. And our stakeholders can benefit from this project. Additional delivery and pickup options for local food and low food access. Independent food retailers may be able to buy larger amounts of products through a food hub or an aggregation facility. Farmers, you know, an increased market access for small and mid-sized farms, but also an opportunity to process their own product. So there's a great deal of benefit from this facility. We feel, I won't go into all the detail to try to keep you on your time limit of 10 minutes. But I'll share my contact information. If any of you are interested in becoming or being a part of our stakeholder process and meeting with us and discussing what you feel the needs are for the community as a whole, you know, we're not just looking at Frederick, we really are looking at the surrounding community and what the needs are as far as food processing, aggregation, and distribution. We would be happy to connect you with our vendor team for a stakeholder interview. We definitely want to make sure we get a broad group of individuals involved.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. And if you want to put your contact info in the chat as well.
Yep.
And next up is our discussion and Q&A that's going to be facilitated by Lorianne. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Esther. And I just wanted to say thank you so much. I mean, I just so appreciate our speakers today. And I feel like personally, I've just learned so much. My head is spinning from all the information I just learned. And thank you so much for everybody for waiting for the end for questions. You know, just wondering if we could go ahead and I'll try to go ahead and monitor the chat for questions. And if you could go ahead, we have a lot of folks on the call. So if you could go ahead and use the raising hand feature, if you can, if you can use the raising hand feature, you're certainly welcome if you can't do that to unmute and ask your question verbally or put your question in the chat. But again, we're taking questions for Tariq Sheriff, Brittany Cook, Noel Bielaczyc. I'm so sorry if I botched your name. No.
It's okay.
Katie Stephen. Thank you. So thanks so much.
Lorianne, I see some hands raised.
I see some hands. Thank you. I was just looking. So let's see. Might we go ahead and start with Mike Houston. I believe, I'm so sorry with my screen. That was the first hand I saw. So why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful. I guess this is mostly for Tariq and Katie, but I think one of the through lines, at least that I noticed in the facilities we went to, was flexibility, both of operations and of the physical space. So as you're going through the process of planning, how do you think about building a facility that's exactly how you imagine it's going to be used, or do you build in some of that flexibility for sort of the unknown in the future?
I think that's a great question, Mike, and something that's come up a lot. And it's definitely about having flexibility for the future. We have to think about, we don't know what's coming next, and we can't have that this is the only thing this facility can be used for. So we are definitely looking at flexibility of space, things that are movable so that, we can keep the facility as modern as possible.
Yeah, and same in our work as well. It's really, again, about flexibility and having these large open spaces with modular tables and utilities and tools and pieces and the latest infrastructure and the latest gadgets and toys that are lovely in kitchens. And thinking about large scale production is really important. And we want to be able to have that space where we can convert to light manufacturing. If at a certain point in the future we need that kind of space, then we can drop in equipment that is possible for that. It just depends on the evolution of the food system in our area.
Mike, I just want to jump into and say we have a food hub in Michigan called Valley Hub at Kalamazoo Valley Community College. It's kind of a hybrid model because it's a community college, so it's an educational facility as well as a functioning food hub. And they really went into that project with flexibility in mind. And so their space is a really great example of how you can approach that. There's essentially a utility trench all throughout a large open space. And then they have overhead utility hookups, hot water, air pressure, electricity. And then they basically have an array of different food processing equipment and washing tanks and things that they can put in whatever location they want throughout this large processing space. And they've tweaked and retweaked and adjusted and moved things around many, many times throughout the few years they've been operating. So it's a really cool example of how to design a flexible space. I'll drop a link here in the chat.
Thanks for sharing that, Noel. And thank you, Philip, for your patience. I know you've had your hand up for a while. How about your question next?
So I haven't shown up at this food economy working group. I've been very involved with the environmental impact working group for the last couple of years. And they're also looking at this issue from another angle. I've also participated in some of the recommendation formulation at the state level with the Food System Resiliency Council that Brittany kind of reported on. A couple of questions, just generally, I don't expect answers for, but I do have one specific one I would like an answer to, and primarily directed at Tariq. Are local producers, these are the general questions, are local producers able to scale to meet demand? My assessment looking at this for the last 8 months is that table crop production in this region is probably less than 10% of what we eat. Most of it is trucked in from long distances on diesel food, and seeing the impact of climate and rising energy cost on that production. And so that's translating into 10 or 20, 30% increase in our grocery bills. Seasonal labor housing is another issue that's emerged as a limiting factor. The training and development of the next generation of farmers. And then I'm happy to see Frederick County represented here. I know they're working on looking at this in a broader fashion as well. My specific question is around sort of data collection. We're finding very little current data about what are our consumption patterns, where does our food come from, where are the vulnerabilities in the systems. And I'm thinking that, I think you called them broadliners, but the big box grocery stores typically have a very proprietary, from farm to produce aisle kind of system that's highly tightly just-in-time managed. It would be great if we could get these people engaged in the conversation. I'm sure they've been sensitized to supply chain disruptions, et cetera, thanks to COVID. Are any of you guys talking to them? Can we get them to the table? Can we get access to the data to have a better, more complete picture about where our systems are, what the threats are, what we need to prepare for?
Yeah, so Philip, that's a great question. And a lot of that work is being done through the COG and HCMA with their, let me get the name right, the catastrophic preparedness grant they have from FEMA. And it's kind of what we call locally or regionally as the Food and Water Resiliency Study. It's about the supply chain. So they've done a lot of that work. They've gathered a ton of data. They've sat with some of these broadliners, national producers, and grocery stores, and have mapped that supply chain and the pinch points and the danger areas, and what that looks like, and also data collection with food needs, not only through federal benefit programs like SNAP or WIC and TANF, but also through spending across the board and utilization of food hubs and emergency food providers as well. So that data isn't public yet. They've got a framework for moving forward, and they're working on a public facing document from as part of this study, but that is happening, and they're working on making those connections with those grocers to understand what that system looks like. And so that work is really helping to inform our needs and production within the area. But your point is also very well taken, is that, I mean, regionally, I don't think that any individual small area or state, can produce what's needed or house the individuals needed to address that, to make ourselves self-sufficient. So it's really got this kind of collective outcome goals of what can be produced in Maryland versus DC, which is probably not a lot, let's be honest. Virginia, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, looking at the, the mid-Atlantic region as a whole. And how do we have these collective outcomes to address who can do what, and how do we aggregate that across the system? I think that's kind of the next phase of what we're looking at. And so moving forward in the future, I think that's an approach we need to take for resiliency long-term.
I'd love to follow up with you. Is Lindsay Smith the point of contact at COG on this?
So Steve Bieber is the one. Lindsay Smith is also working with them. And then Mark Scott from DC HCMA is kind of leading the consultant team in the study. But yeah, so I'll put my email in the chat. Send me an email. We can connect and follow up.
Thank you.
Lorian, you're muted.
It's always so hard to keep up with. Michelle, I was about to call on you.
I thought so.
There you go.
Great, thanks. Thank you so much to our speakers. And I think this is a question that encompasses maybe all the speakers, but I'm just, I was noticing the role that local government has played, especially in DC and Frederick, that might make at least Frederick more able to take advantage of some of these statewide recommendations if there becomes some state investment that Brittany mentioned through the Food System Resiliency Council at the state level. So I'm wondering, Katie, if you could, and Tariq, if you could talk about like the justification at the local government level for doing this work and investing, and and maybe the background of how that came to be.
I'd be happy to talk about that. So agriculture is one of our largest commercial industries in Frederick County. It's a multi-million-dollar industry in benefit, and then in tax benefit alone to Frederick County. So it's key to our heritage and key to our future. And we've been really blessed in Frederick to have a very supportive county executive and county council that supports agriculture and understands the need for local food. And so that's how this kind of came about. So a couple years, 2019, I believe, we actually brought together a stakeholder group of farmers for a roundtable about value added and kind of the needs of the ag community. And this is actually one of the things that came out of it, the idea for a processing facility that would benefit our farm community. We kind of workshopped it for a year and a half, put together stakeholder groups. COVID happened. kind of held us back. And then we asked for funding from our general budget. And so that, we were really blessed with just great support here in Frederick. So there's actually 2 of us that work with the farm community daily in Frederick, just in economic development. And then we have a separate land preservation group. So I think the key thing for Frederick has been our elected officials understanding the importance of agriculture. And with ag land making up over 60% of our land mass in Frederick, I think that helps us. But I think it's important to get to know your elected officials. Like that would be my one piece of advice I'd give anybody. Get to know them, share the importance of local food, the farm and ag community, and what that benefit does and brings to your county. I think the sooner you know them and kind of get in their pocket, as you say, like, they just know the importance. It really helps to build that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think knowing elected officials is really important. We're a little different in DC. We're quasi-state, but much smaller. So we have a little more freedom to kind of move and groove in our own way, which is nice. But we're different than, Frederick County, Montgomery County, even, Prince George's County, Arlington. We don't have space to grow enough food to feed our population. It's enough to get some supports into the system for, food security maybe, and some food access pieces to be addressed, but it's not enough to produce food for everyone who lives here. So that we're kind of in a different boat. We're looking at some different methods, some, vertical farming, maybe hydroponics, that kind of stuff, and evaluating those with our Director of Urban Ag and, DC Health and regulations across the board. But the policy space is really important because we're working on more regionally, right? We're working on solutions that are oriented for a regional approach, which is how we have to work in DC to address our food system needs. So I think that's where we differ a little bit. Again, it's really finding council members, politicians that have buy-in and want to address these issues. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, which I'm sure all of you can relate to, is that everyone eats. There's always food somewhere at grocery stores, and it's not really always a seen problem until the supply chain fails or breaks or something really comes up, and there's a lot of advocacy in that space. So how do you find the buy-in and tell the story that makes that change happen? And so we're trying to lead that with these studies and looking at what's the impact, what's the focus on equity, how are we creating wealth generation, how are we creating tax revenue, how are we creating revenue for the district and supporting other areas. And that's kind of the story we want to tell. And what does that look like in future climate change mitigation, right? So how do we plan to address future needs and future disasters? And that's really the story that's more compelling, I think, for in the policy space. And having that cross-sector work with other agencies and finding multiple solutions through this kind of system is really important for us in telling that story and making that policy really work for us.
Thanks. And then just, Noel, a quick follow-up. In your food hub survey, is there anything about, local government buy-in or investment that indicates sustainability, or I'm not sure, or like, did anything come out of that survey that says anything about the role of local government?
Well, we don't specifically ask questions about partnerships with local government. Obviously, we ask quite a bit about financial models and things like that. And so, I mean, we do see an important role that local municipalities can play in supporting financial viability. I think particularly in the early stages, sort of the 1 to 3 year time frame, which is kind of the most critical time frame for food hub startups. We see viability increases after 5 years, and once you get to 5 to 10 years, the viability is much higher. So yeah, I think there's an important role for those kind of partnerships in the first few years of getting food hubs established. But yeah, we don't have a ton of specific questions about that per se.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to ask a quick question of Brittany. I am sort of just one of the threads through our entire food infrastructure series is that we've noticed that the sort of shortage of cold storage, and most entities we've talked to have said, cold storage is a limiting factor for their operations. Katie, I noticed you said that you all found the same thing. And with the recommendations for cold storage specifically, do you see those interacting here with any of the sort of interests that the sort of food infrastructure building we're talking about here?
I guess can you rephrase your question maybe?
Sure. I'm noticing that the cold storage that recommendations are geared towards emergency preparedness, and also have relationships with food banks and food pantries for food assistance. And I'm wondering if there are any recommendations or there's been any talk about the cold storage funding from the state being also utilized for, sort of startup funding for this kind of infrastructure being built for commercial interests as well, right? So,
okay, gotcha. So the short answer is I have not heard any movement on the cold storage funding and moving it to that that area. I will say that we just released the new report, and we on November 1st and to the General Assembly, and have just been able to post it online. So I don't know what the turnaround is in terms of movement or further movement of that particular recommendation. It would be interesting I believe there were talks about where that cold storage could be located, at least on the subcommittee level, in terms of like maybe churches, in addition to the others that you already had mentioned. But in terms of any other updates, I don't really have any for that particular question.
Yeah, cool. And no, I know that this is an ongoing conversation with the Food Resiliency Council. Like, they're coming out with their reports every year.
Yeah, and this is actually my first go around with the report post being submitted. So I'm actually interested to see how long it'll take as well for a turnaround and any feedback or uptake of any of our recommendations. So, but I don't mind. We'll keep everyone posted. And we do have like ongoing, I think you're also on the correspondence that we send out for like updates. And so hopefully we're hopeful that some of those recommendations will be uptake.
Keeping posted. Well, let's see. Do we have any other questions? Phil, I've noticed that your hand is up. Okay, it's just still up from earlier. I also noticed we have a question in the chat that I believe this is a question that may have come up during Katie, during your presentation, but just wondering if you could elaborate on what is a food pharmacy?
I do not know what a food pharmacy is. That is actually from our vendor, but I will find an answer out for you and get back to you because I think it sounds pretty neat. But that was directly from our vendor.
Yeah, I can probably speak to that a little bit. So food pharmacy, in our understanding, is something that your doctor can prescribe you fruits and vegetables to get, and then you go to this food pharmacy and you get a prescription and you get usually 10 or 20 or however dollar amount to purchase fruits or vegetables. And it's usually a partnership with emergency food provider or a food bank or someone like that, or sometimes in DC we have Produce RX, which is support with Giant, and they meet with a dietitian. After they get the prescription, they get $20 spent on fruits and vegetables. So it's a really great way to address food access and healthcare needs all in one.
Awesome. I feel like that's a perfect description. Okay. I am noticing that there may not be any other questions, so I'm just going to give it one more moment for any other questions that may arise.
I have a question that I think Lauren, you and I sort of chatted about this previously, but I'm just sort of curious for all, I guess maybe for Tariq and Katie specifically, but for really all the speakers, as we think about sort of new projects in Montgomery County, what do you think would most complement what you're working on without being kind of duplicative? Or you both talked about kind of a regional focus and wanting to kind of establish systems that work region wide. And so just wondering if you have any thoughts on that as we sort of round out this food infrastructure series here in Montgomery County Food Council.
Yeah, I can start with that. So I think there's probably a couple different needs that I see from the district space that might extend out. One of those is light manufacturing for food manufacturing space. We have some in the district, but we're running out of space just across the board, unfortunately. So I know some of that gets lost to Prince George's County, and I think a little bit to Montgomery County, maybe not as much. So I think that's probably a great way to grasp and gather a lot of those food entrepreneurs that need that space to do startup and move from that startup phase into like that pilot plant or secondary stage to grow to a regional or national brand is really important. And that creates a lot of tax revenue and jobs, which is fantastic. So I think that's one part of it. And I wouldn't be disappointed if there were other food aggregation, spaces across, each county, maybe smaller nodes of a larger hub potentially, or, spokes on that wheel possibly would be great for more food system redundancy, which is important. And then potential for, value added processing to then sell to other jurisdictions around, I think is also really important. So I think any of those ideas would be very complementary.
Yeah, I agree with those. I think the food hub idea, there's a huge need. There's more than just a need in Frederick or DC. And I think that can be replicated across the board. Cold storage and dry storage, or cold storage especially, it's just huge need for farmers because it can be a regulatory nightmare to go through some of these health department regulations to store on farm or in other places. And so a controlled environment for that is a great option. We would love to have farmers in Montgomery County be a part of our process. We're definitely looking at that end of the county kind of as an idea for a potential facility. So we would love to have them reach out to us, but I think there's a greater need. We can't serve all the need in one facility or in two facilities. There's a need for processing across the board and across all counties.
That's great.
If I could jump in, just Tariq, in terms of DC's ability to produce local food, I did a back of the envelope calculation a couple of years ago. Montgomery County has 1.1 million people. Even if we converted every square inch to growing table crops, my guess is we could only feed about 25 to 30% of that population. So we're always going to be a net importer. And it's important for us to define these regional collaborations. So thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good information to have. It's something we're trying to figure out in DC, how to get some of that stuff.
I think along those lines, and this is, hi everyone, Tom from 4P Foods. Along those lines, the thing that gives me some hope is the possibility of converting a lot of production that is in this region. If you look at the eastern shore of Maryland, it's one of the biggest production regions in the country. We've got the Shenandoah Valley, Southside Virginia. I mean, there's some real large swaths of land that could be converted into multiple different kinds of production, which is also a nice thing about the diversity of our region. Say nothing about the integration with the waterways, Chesapeake Bay, the infrastructure that can be tapped there. There's definitely a real set of assets when zoomed out to look at the Mid-Atlantic at a regional level. So I applaud everyone for having this regional discussion and for pulling it together. It's as a fellow food hub nerd on the call, this is my cup of tea.
Thanks, Tom. I think we have time for one more question from Molly. Molly, do you have your hand up, or let's see? That may have been an accident. Well, great. Well, I just wanted to close us out by then highlighting Lynn Rubin Traverse Ursa's comment in the chat that there's that start of a great regional food hub meeting of the minds, so much overlap of individuals and families living in one region. And she asks, is there a formal collaborative process in place for each of these grassroots food hub efforts to come together and strategize on a larger cohesive scale? I think that's an excellent question to sort of round out the sort of conclusion of our food systems infrastructure opportunities initiative, because obviously, yeah, as Tom then mentions in the chat, we are very lucky in our region to have the Eastern Food Hub Collaborative. We're also very lucky to have the Maryland Foods Resiliency Council, the new Office of Food System Resiliency in Montgomery County, and of course, the Washington Metropolitan Council of Governments to kind of coordinate us together. All right, so thank you. And to close us out, may I pass the baton back to Esther.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you again to our speakers for being here. I know we're a minute over, so I want to be respectful of your time. Again, they put their contact information in the chat. So thank you again, everyone, and happy holidays.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.